Right, so made it through to the end of the day, first of all. Congratulations, I know it was a lot to take in. Yes, my name is Brendan Garland. Thank you for coming. I'm a lecturer in the Center for English Language Education at Asia University. We mostly take care of the freshman English throughout our schools, as well as some upper level courses. Today I will be talking about how we can get our students to speak out more in class. To participate orally, which of course is not only something that's popular right now in couple circles, but it's something that the Ministry of Education in Japan has been pretty clear about. We want our students speaking more in class, which is all very fine. It's a great idea, but I'm sure just about anyone here who's been in front of a Japanese EFL class has at some point been faced with this. Silence. Room full of quiet, unresponsive, shy students, maybe their heads are down, avoiding eye contact. It's a difficult situation for us as teachers, but of course it's even more detrimental to our students who are receiving little benefit in their oral communication skills by sitting and passively listening to us. And of course by now it's widely accepted in TEFL's research that students must actively use the language in order to improve. So, how do we bridge this gap? How do we go from the research, institutions, our own instincts that are telling us we need our students speaking more, and then these silent students? Well, I'd like to share with you today 5 techniques that I've found to be effective in my own classes. The first, greeting students as they enter and exit the class. Second, posing daily questions to students. Then identifying and utilizing outgoing students. Using classroom activities and games, and finally using humor in class. I hope that by the end of my presentation, if there are any of these techniques that you haven't tried before, you'll be encouraged to do so, or even if you have or are familiar with some of these techniques, you'll gain a deeper understanding of a lot of the theory behind them, why they can be such valuable and effective students in our class. First, a little background on the issue. Why is it important for students to participate orally? Well, it's what the research tells us. This is just a very small sample, but yes, all of the current TEFL research is saying students need to be speaking in order to improve their oral communication skills. And the Japanese context. So I think we can all agree that it is hard to learn a second language, no matter what country we come from. But for those of us who have taught in other countries or situations, we notice that there's something especially strong about the silence in a Japanese classroom, about the taciturn nature of some of the students. And it's not just us thinking this. Researchers who have looked into this issue have found that yes, they are really quiet. Entire books have even been written trying to explain this issue. Jim King wrote a very interesting book called Silence in the Second Language Classroom, which came up with a number of reasons behind why our Japanese EFL class is so quiet. And he came up with a lot of different reasons. Confucian ideals of passive education. I'm the master teacher, you're the silent student who's supposed to be there taking notes. No offense to the note-taking. Cultural attachment to empathy, non-vocal communication, early development of socialization, and also an overall tendency in Japanese society to employ silence as a face-saving strategy. If you ever had the experience of calling on Shoto to give you the answer, only to have him stare at the ceiling for 2 minutes, it's not because he's still trying to find that answer, it's because he's hoping that you'll call another student and thereby saving him the embarrassment. So I think those are really important things to keep in mind. And in a lot of ways, it's not our students' fault that they're silent. That brings us to the methods. First of which is greeting students as they enter and exit the class. I put this technique first because it's a really simple, easy thing to do, but I think it's something that we often overlook in the rush of preparing our boards, preparing our lessons. We forget to do this, but it can be quite an effective technique. And by greeting, I don't necessarily mean shaking hands like this woman's doing right here. It could be a little awkward in the university situation. Feel free to try it if you'd like to. But a simple hello, goodbye. I really like this technique because it gives me a chance to interact with every single student in my class, even just briefly, in each lesson. And I think that's especially important for some of our shyer, more reticent students who wouldn't get to speak to otherwise. And research supports the idea of greeting. Alday and Pakurer study of some at-risk students found that simply by greeting them, they were actually able to increase the students' on-task behavior. A follow-up study in 2018 found that the students actually had less disruptive classroom behavior as well. So in sum, what these studies are finding is that simply by greeting our students, we're getting to do more what we want them to do in class. And what do we want our students to do? We want them to speak. And there's every reason to think we can extrapolate these findings into our EFL situation. When a student interacts with the teacher in one aspect of the class, it's easier for them to do it in other aspects as well. And finally, it's also a really great opportunity to learn about our students. As we're interacting with them, as we're greeting them, especially as we start to get into more involved greetings later in the semester, we're learning about their jobs, their hobbies, their club activities. I've even learned way more than I ever wanted to know about J-pop and K-pop songs just by asking my students what they're listening to on their iPhones. The next step, the next technique, is daily questions to students. So this basically involves just coming up with a question, writing it up there on the board, having students discuss pairs or groups, and then getting their answers from them. You could pair this with roll call, something that a lot of teachers have to do. Makes it a little more interesting for you and for the students. As far as how to go about it, coming up with the question, first of all, it can be a question which is varied in complexity, but should generally be relatively easy for them to understand. You don't want something that's way over their heads, so you're not going to get a lot of responses. It can be related to the lesson of the day. If you are doing past simple, well, you can come up with a question in the past simple. If you're talking about travel that day, ask them a question about travel. So it ties in nicely. And one final thing to keep in mind is try to avoid any questions that are going to just elicit one-word replies. This is where the magic word why comes in so great. Not just where would you like to go traveling, but why would you like to go there? What would you do if you went there? Things like that. At the next stage, you could read the question. Either you could read it or call on a student to read it, explain it, and check for comprehension. And I also think it's a good idea to provide your own model response at that point. Then the students discuss, either in pairs or in groups. I think this is a really important step because it gives the students a chance to organize their thoughts before they're answering it for you. And then we go into the responses. Like I said, you could pair it with roll call. It's kind of a judgment call how long you want to take with it. Oftentimes earlier in the semester when I'm still trying to learn about my students, learn all their names, I might call on each student. Later you could just ask a select few or even mix it up, have them think about the questions in groups, elicit their responses. Benefits of daily questions. First of all, for the students and the teachers. Like with the greetings, it's a chance for every single student in the class to have at least one opportunity for some oral output. Also, learning about your students' personalities. Every day as they're telling you a little bit more about their experiences, we get to know them. And they're also learning about you through those model responses that you're providing. Benefits for the class. Really it helps to foster positive group dynamics in your class. This is what makes our classes click, what we describe as a good class or a bad class. So when we know more about each other, when we know what our likes or experiences are, it helps us to break down barriers between us. Researchers have pointed out to the importance of shared knowledge and personal information amongst members of the class is key to fostering these positive group dynamics. And finally, it's one chance for meaningful output from the students. It's them asking or answering a question about their lives, not just something that they're reading in a book or on a handout. The next technique is to identify and utilize outgoing students. So as our classes are rolling along, we're greeting our students every day, we're asking them questions, we're getting to know them a little better. Eventually we're going to find that some of the students are a little more outgoing, a little more willing to speak than other students. These could be many different types. You have your super go-getter, who just wants that A+, no matter what. The I Heart English student, we all love them. They want to speak English, they want to speak to foreigners. But it could be other types as well, even the kind of class clown. Maybe they're not speaking about what you want them to, but they're not shy, and they're speaking out. No matter what their motivation, the one thing that they have in common is they're all demonstrating a willingness to communicate. And they can serve an important role in our class as models for the quieter students. And just to define my terms here, I'm using willingness to communicate in the sense that McIntyre, Clement, Bruno, and Noels defined it as a situational variable with both transient and enduring influences. In their research, these four came up with a kind of model, pyramid model of the willingness to communicate, with the top 3 levels dealing with more transient influences. Those are what's really most important for our classes. At the very top of the pyramid, we have actual L2 use, when students speak out in the language. And it behooves us as teachers, when students do this, to allow those students to speak, even if it doesn't necessarily go along with our lesson plan, our intentions. Because by doing this, we're freeing up a space in the lower levels of the pyramid. For example, on the second level, we have behavioral intention, willingness to communicate. When we allow a student to speak, we're demonstrating to all of the students that oral participation is accepted in our classes, which is really important. Especially, as I mentioned, in the Japanese situation, students might not even realize I'm allowed to speak out in this class. Moving down to the third level, we find situated antecedents, including the desire to speak, to communicate, rather with a specific person. So as the quieter students witness the exchanges between the teacher and more outgoing students, we can reasonably expect that their desire to communicate out in class will also increase. A further benefit, going back to the idea of group dynamics, is that all of the class starts to develop a sense of group roles. As it's been defined by Senior, a variety of roles can be found for class members so that when a class is fully bonded, every student has a role which contributes to the maintenance of the class as a group. So, of course, not every member of the class is going to become the most vocal, outspoken, but given time and appropriate direction, we can expect that every student will find a role that contributes to the class and encourages oral output. As an example, last year during an information sharing activity, I had one student admit that he loved smelling sweaty socks. He had a passion for sweaty socks. Of course, the rest of the class busted out laughing. It became kind of a running joke throughout the semester. And moreover, that student, he was kind of happy to take on that role of funny oddball in the class. Later on in the course of the semester, other students would call on him for these kind of offbeat examples and these crazy comments. They recognized his role as well. Was that in my lesson plan? No. Did I expect a student would admit to smelling sweaty socks? No. But it was something that was able to come about by creating an environment where oral participation was accepted. The next technique, activities and games. I'm sure no one here is a stranger to using activities and games in your classes, nor will you be surprised that a lot of research supports the effectiveness of using activities and games. I particularly like the idea expressed by Richard Amato that games can play a significant role in lowering L2 learner anxiety levels, thereby promoting participation, which of course is exactly what we're trying to do. In my own classes, I've seen some of the quietest students get wrapped up in a game and become a completely different person during those games. However, activities and games in particular are competitive by their nature. It's the thing that keeps them kind of interesting for students. So we do have to watch out with that, because if we let that get out of hand, it can be a problem for the class. So a few ideas to keep in mind when it comes to that. In order, things that we can do before, during, and after our activities and games to keep them from getting out of hand. First of all, in order to keep things light, we can put students into teams. This keeps any final results from being too personal. It develops a sense of camaraderie amongst the team members, and it's also good for in-group, out-group dynamics, which can be so important in Japan. To take it a further level, I oftentimes have my students choose silly names for their teams. I've had the boba teas, the mugi chas, plastic bottles, whatever happens to be sitting around class at that time. And finally, to assign a ridiculous point value to the final question. So, example, you have team A is 5 points, team B has 6 points. This is the final question, guys. It's worth 1,000 points. Usually draws a laugh from the students, diffuses a little bit of the tension in that situation. Also watch out for bad feelings. Try not to overburden any one class member. You're doing a vocabulary activity. You know there's one student who's not so strong in vocabulary. Well, of course, don't call on that student for the final question. And this last one is important. Erase the results after the game's over. Before I really learned this, I would kind of leave it up here, blankly go off in my class, and I'd find students just dejectedly looking at the board. So, sense of pride. I realized they hadn't got over that game, so erasing it afterwards, always a good idea. And that brings us to our final point, using humor in class. I've said it before, but I think it bears repeating. Learning a foreign language is an inherently nervous experience. It makes us hesitant. And it's one that's really in need of lightening. What's better at lightening than humor? And the research agrees with this. In the free response section of one survey that was done with university students, many students talked about humor's ability to lower tension and boost class morale. Again, which is exactly what we're trying to do in our classes. So at this point, you're thinking, that's all fine, humor sounds great, but I'm just not that funny of a person. Well, I don't think you have to be Eddie Murphy in order to bring some humor into your classes. A lot of opportunities for humor present themselves in the normal course of a class. For example, comical grammar errors. A student refers to a male student as she, or a female student as he. You ask students, what are you going to do on the break? I'm going on vacation with your parents. So it's just a matter of stopping, look of surprise, maybe repeat the error back to them. Usually gets a laugh from the class. Pop culture references, bringing in Matsupa Deluxe. I saw it in a presentation earlier today. Whoever's the funniest comedy duo of that time. In jokes, sweaty socks. Mispronunciations of English and Japanese. My students love when I mangle their foreign language, and my Japanese is mama, so they love to hear when I mispronounce their hometown's name, something like that. Viral videos, oh, I got so much fun. Apple pen. But really, I think more important than any one technique is the attitude that we bring into our classes. If you have a light, carefree attitude, your students are likely to pick up on that and do the same. If you take ourselves too seriously, our lessons too seriously, you're going to lose the opportunities for humor. I think one way to avoid this is by keeping ourselves as the biggest target of our jokes. My mispronunciations of Japanese are kind of one way that I do that. In this way, we demonstrate to our students that perfection is not a requirement for our classes. And they can feel free to open up and express themselves. Again, some of the funniest moments in my classes, not from me, but from my students. So, I'd just like to conclude with the kind of surprising fact that I came up with during my research. In over 48 hours of Japanese tertiary EFL classroom observation, Jim King recorded only 7 instances of student-initiated talk. That works out to 1 for every 7 hours. So not a lot of student talk. So I think the need for change is pretty clear. These 5 techniques are intended to help students get to know each other and the teacher better. For each student to feel appreciated and like they have a role to play within the class. And for students to believe contributing orally is an actively encouraged and positive experience, all of which should take us from a class like this to a class like this, which is a truly dynamic space where students are not only improving their spoken fluency, but they have an opportunity to grow as individuals as well. Thank you for listening. I'll just briefly scroll through my references here with credit where credit's due. And yeah, any questions?